As the saying goes, to keep your friends close but your enemy closer. Well, no one ever talks about frenemies. Frenemies are the people in your life that will be your friend at times and help you, and at other times will be your worst enemy. In chapter 5 of the originals, it says that enemies can make enemies are better than allies than frenemies because enemies are less predictable than the frenemies. Although frenemies can cause a lot of stress, I believe that frenemies can be one of your greatest allies. So first I'm going to talk about Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And then I'm going to talk about Jim Dwight from The Office. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Steve Rogers and Tony Stark from The Avengers. So first off, Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton all began working together in the women's right movement to get women's right to vote in the late 1800s. They were wanting, as they worked together at the beginning and were working well together, but then as time went on, Anthony and Stanton realized that Stone was wanting different things and more than what they wanted. And so Anthony and Stanton had pulled away and decided to do their own thing. While they were still rallying for women to get their rights to vote and everything, they would work together occasionally, but there were other times where one would want to work together but the other would say no. But in the end, they ended up getting women's rights, as well as when Anthony and Stanton said that Stone was a vital part of the movement and that she did a good job and wouldn't have wanted anybody else. Next, I'm going to talk about Jim and Dwight from The Office. Jim and Dwight had always been frenemies. Jim is constantly pranking Dwight, and Dwight is always trying to get Jim fired. But throughout the show, you could see how they would work together. Sometimes, like when they go on sales calls or when one of them is really down, like the other would try to help them out. And finally, at the end, when Dwight becomes manager, Dwight makes Jim his assistant to the regional manager because Dwight felt like there was nobody else who he could trust with the job. And finally, with Steve Rogers and Iron Man from the Avengers, or Captain America and Iron Man, or Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, they became friends at the beginning to help protect Earth from Thanos, who sent Loki, and then again in Ultron. But after Ultron, they got into a huge fight and which led to Civil War. And they got into this huge fight against everybody, and so Captain America and a bunch of the Avengers they left the Avengers and disappeared for a while and wasn't speaking to Tony or anything. But at the end, they ended up coming together because Thanos came back again, and Tony knew that he could call Steve at any time, and Steve would come and help when he needed it. And so in conclusion, frenemies can be one of your greatest allies, even though they cause you a lot of stress. So first I talked about Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the women's rights movement. And then I talked about Jim and Dwight from The Office and how they ended up being friends in the end, and how then lastly I talked about Steve Rogers and Tony Stark from The Avengers and how they were friends and then they stopped talking to each other and then they were friends again. And frenemies can be your worst enemies at times, but they'll always be there for when you need them. Although it doesn't mention frenemies, but as the saying goes, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.